Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Professor Byong-Chul from IFES at Kyungnam University. I would like to thank you all for joining us for this international conference establishing peace on the Korean Peninsula and the new government's foreign policy. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all of you for joining us at this conference. Now we are going to begin this conference. First of all, His Excellency Minister of Unification Kwon Young-se will deliver a keynote speech, but he had to participate in another urgent meeting at the National Assembly, so the Vice Minister Kim Ki-Woong will be reading the keynote speech.
통일부 차관입니다.
Hello everyone, I'm Vice Minister of Unification. Minister is now taking part at the meeting held at the National Assembly, so I'll be reading his text.
통일 외교 안보의 중추 연구기관인 극동문제연구소.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the 50th anniversary of IFES, which played a pivotal role in setting out the policy of national unification as well as foreign policy. Also, congratulate 33rd anniversary of the University of North Korean Studies. Thank you very much, President An Hoyoung of the University of North Korean Studies, and also the members at the Institute for Far Eastern Studies. I welcome everyone who are joining us virtually and physically. All the experts in Korea have gathered today at this prestigious international conference, and I firmly believe that we'll be able to exchange our views to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula and new government foreign policy. Distinguished participants, the current inter-Korean relations and also the neighboring countries are at the crossroad. North Korea's nuclear weapon development threatens not only the relations with South Korea but also damages the political situation in the Northeast Asia. The strategic hegemony power struggles between China, US, and also other neighboring countries are getting heightened and heightened. Everything's are further complicating the relations. Amid such instability, our foremost task is, once again, encouraging North Korea to halt its nuclear development program as well as to come to the international stage. There are three things I'd like to mention. First, we need to put out sanctions and also, once again, encourage North Korea to come to the dialogue. With solid and ironclad relations with the United States, we would never let North Korea to continue to develop nuclear weapons. Second, through sanctions and also pressure, we need to make sure that North Korea, instead of developing nuclear weapons, should make sure to stop developing nuclear weapons. And for that, we need to continuously and consistently make sure to implement the sanctions against North Korea and also provide pressures. Well, currently, there is only sanctions and nothing further. That is why North Korea keeps developing nuclear weapons. Third, we need to continuously have a dialogue and also make sure to encourage North Korea to come to the negotiating or dialogue table. At the same time, we need to encourage them and lead them to come up to the international stage. And also we need to make sure to promote exchanges and cooperation so that unification-oriented coexistent co-prosperity should be our another option. Denuclearization of North Korea is also a common goal of US and other countries. We need to work closely with the other countries. So we need to pursue denuclearizations, and for that we need a more comprehensive and syndicated approach so the strategic environment can be established. Based on such foundations, Korean Peninsula can enter into the perpetual peace on the Korean Peninsula. Ladies and gentlemen, August 15, during the commemorative speech to be delivered, President Yoon presented audacious initiative which is asking North Korea to halt the nuclear development program, and if so, will be putting emphasis on, once again, provide the great support, especially significant improvement of North Korea's economy and its livelihood if North Korea halt its nuclear development and pursue practical denuclearization. This audacious initiative is envisioning, once again, the eventual peaceful settlement. And coming up on a step-by-step basis, we are ready to provide significant improvement, such as providing the foundations to modernize its infrastructures and also inducing other policies to encourage and broadening the development of North Korea. In implementing such thing, I'd like to share with you in a more specific manner which area the government is focusing on. The audacious initiatives encompasses everything: the political, military, foreign policy, economic area.
In the process of both Koreas talking about the three areas, we are going to try to reach an agreement. In the congratulatory speech, we have talked about the economic development of North Korea and made a proposal. Of course, we already have a cooperation plan for politics and military as well as economy. And once we start dialogue with North Korea, we are going to bring all the three cooperation plan on the table.
한반도 지원
And in supporting North Korea for food and resources, drinking water, food and improvement program can start right away without any preconditions. If we can achieve comprehensive nuclear agreement in this process, we will trigger economic cooperation between the two Koreas and carry out the 5 specific projects mentioned in the National Liberation Day speech.
역할을 확보하고자 합니다. 북한의 행보에 수동적으로 대응하는 것이 아니라
We are not going to passively deal with North Korea's actions. We are going to take active stance, and our active stance is going to create a new atmosphere and new order on the Korean Peninsula.
정부는 이러한 방안 위에서
On top of this plan, the Korean government will carry out the items mentioned on the congratulatory speech in an orderly manner, and we are going to be open at all times, and I hope North Korea can open its mind and actively hold our hand. The bold and audacious initiative the Korean government mentioned can pave the way for vicious cycle on the Korean Peninsula, and we need international cooperation and diplomatic cooperation to make that happen. We need international community's value-based solidarity in this regard. Korea's unification and North Korean policies
지지하고 공감할 것입니다.
can receive the support from the international community if we work with the international community, and consistent policies for unification is really important for promoting international collaboration and cooperation. If we can achieve international community's cooperation, their support and solidarity will be strengthened. And unified Korea, the clear vision must be shared with the world. And the future Korea's unified Korean Peninsula, we have to propose what kind of harmony it can achieve in the world. Based on this, we can achieve consensus and empathy and support from the international community.
청취자 여러분, 앞서
Distinguished guests, the external and internal environments that we are facing are quite challenging. The tensions on the Korean Peninsula are rising. However, Yoon administration will not be swayed by the tumultuous stance and fickle attitude of North Korea. Please pay attention to the consistent implementation of our policies, and we will listen to your ideas and advice. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다. 김경철
Thank you very much. Now we are going to have a commemorative photo session.
앞으로 나와주시면 감사드립니다.
So please come up to the stage for a commemorative photo session.
네, 참고로 말씀드린 대로
Ladies and gentlemen, we are providing you with simultaneous interpretation services. Turn to channel 1 for Korean, channel 2 for English.
지금부터 3방
Now we are going to start the International Conference on Establishing Peace on the Korean Peninsula and the new government's foreign policy. And the moderator is former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Minsoon, and we are joined by Ambassador An Hoyoung, Ambassador Lee Soo-hoon, Ambassador Bang No-byuk, Ambassador Shin Jung-seung, Ambassador Ko-yuan, and Professor Chung Ge-young from Fudan University. And online, we are joined by Mr. Joseph Detran, Ms. Carla Freeman,
전문가 또 현재
and she is now the editor of Asia Perspective, and also joined by Professor Okonoiki Masao and Professor Alexander Vorontsov.
참석 예정이었던 유통
We were supposed to be joined by Professor Zhu Feng from Nanjing International Relations Institute, but he could not make today because of an urgent issue. Please start the discussion.
마이크를 넘기겠습니다.
I will give the microphone to Minister Song Min-soon.
우선 저 해외에서
Hello, everyone. First of all,
여러분들께
I'd like to exchange my greetings to those of you joining us virtually. Ambassador Joseph Detrani, welcome. Former U.S. Special Envoy Joseph Detrani, and also Dr. Carla Freeman, Senior Expert for China and also former Editor-in-Chief of Asian Perspective, welcome. And also Professor Masao Okonogi from Keio University, long time no see you. Professor Alexander Vorontsov, also long time I haven't seen you, and welcome for joining us today. Today,
오늘
today we are gathered.
잘 안 들립니까? 괜찮아요? 경남대학교 극동문제연구소 50주년
We are gathered here
그렇게 하라고요? 소리가 안 들린다는 게 같은데? 그런데 왜 자꾸 울려? 소리가 안 들린다고 해요. 그리고 대학교
We are gathered at the international.
이게 지금 통역하는 이야기입니까? 반성 있는 게 통역이 지금 같이 막 울리는구나. 34주년 기념 행사를 축하드립니다. 사실 지금 한국은 물론이고 동아시아에서 대표적인 국제 문제.
So IFES has been positioned as the leading international research institute in Northeast Asia, and it's a central hub for research related to North Korea. And University of North Korean Studies is led by President Park Jae-gyu, thanks to his wisdom, passion, and commitment. And it is what it is now thanks to his leadership. And I would like to thank President Lee Kwan-se and President An Woo-young and
대학교 교직원 여러분
all the staff members of IFES and UNKS for organizing today's conference.
8월 18일인데
This is August 18th. 40 years ago, this was the day when there was an axe terrorist event on Panmunjom. It was a peaceful day, but because of an issue related to cutting a tree, there was a major escalation of tensions with a major show of force, flexing of military muscle by the United States, and it was a case that has shown us that peace on the Korean Peninsula is very fragile. And 46 years later, we are still living on the Korean Peninsula in this fragile and vulnerable peace structure. And that is why we decided to call this conference Establishing Peace on the Korean Peninsula.
이렇게 숙명적인 과제를 안고 있는데
So this is a major challenge facing the Korean Peninsula, and IFES and UNKS have organized today's conference, which is really a significant conference in this regard.
우리가 지금 특히 이제 민중 후에 30년 가까이를
For 30 years after the Cold War, we have talked about active peace. And by active peace, that has been promoted for the past 30 years is unlikely to become a realistic goal until far into the future due to two new phenomena, a nuclear North Korea and a new Cold War.
여기에다가
And issues related to the Korean Peninsula are closely related to the interests of major powers. And the interest should be harmonized for peace building, but active peace so far has resulted in very different results. And we now have North Korea with its nuclear weapon, and Cold War are showing signs of emerging as a new Cold War.
사실 우리가 가진 적극적 평화라는
So this positive peace or active peace might not be a realistic goal for us to pursue in the immediate future. In this regard, the choices that South Korea can make is to prevent escalation of tension and armed conflict on the Korean Peninsula and keep the window of opportunities for improvement of situations on the Korean Peninsula. So maintaining a stable passive peace might be the most practical goal for now. President Yoon in his Liberation Day commemoration speech proposed the bold initiative. And if North Korea is sincere in coming to the dialogue table, there is a lot that North Korea can work with South Korea and the United States. Prior to this, the Minister of Unification said in a press conference that he wanted to ask what measures are needed to resolve North Korea's security concerns. North Korea has already shared the details of what they want for security assurance, officially and unofficially. And the Minister of Unification said that he wants to ask North Korea what they really mean. And he was showing the willingness to talk to North Korea.
모양은 적극적 평화를 가지만
So the current administration, even though it is pursuing positive peace on the outside, in the inside it is de facto pursuing the passive peace. And the US seems to have the same stance as well.
담대한 구상
This bold initiative that the Korean government is talking about, as President Yoon Suk-yeol mentioned in his commemoration speech and his press conference, we need to talk to the United States, China, in how to deal with North Korea. All these multiple channels should be mobilized together. So in this regard, in consideration of such perspectives, the host organizations of today's international conference has organized a fabulous panel for us. So we have speakers from Russia, China, the United States, Japan, and North Korean expert. So we are joined by former ambassadors who have worked in those countries. I would like to ask them each a question and get their answer. And the experts from the various nations who are joining us Zoom can also share their comments with us. First of all, I would like to ask President An Hoyoung of University of North Korea Studies. I have a question for you.
윤석열 대통령이 말한 담대한 구상이라는 게 결국 한미 공동의 전략이 안 되면은
The audacious initiative proposed by President Yoon to make a progress, there are conditions to be met. State Department and also the White House, if you look at the comment, they are focusing on sanctions, but also the most important thing is a trilateral cooperation among Korea, Japan, and US. What kind of implication are they thinking? That's my first question. Second, if we implement strategic alliance among the trilateral countries, then this is like putting 2 or 3 drugs in one bottle, expecting to enjoy 3 effects. What if we don't get cured? Do we continuously give the same drugs, or do we change to a new drugs? So my belief is that our negotiations or dialogue with North Korea, we always talk about homogeneous quality, but we need to become more flexible to expect another effect, which means that we have to mix another drug to expect efficacy, a better efficacy. However, United States is very much busy and occupied with other issues like Taiwan, Strait issues, or Ukraine issues, and other issues as well, and they are too preoccupied with other international situations rather than thinking about the inter-Korean relations. So my question to you from Ambassador An, so the audacious initiative proposed by President Yoon, in order to implement that, what are the critical conditions? What do we need to do that? That's my first question. And second question, when everything fails, when North Korea tests nuclear or long-range missiles, do you think that this could be an effective measures going beyond the current sanctions? The audacious initiative, do you believe that it will be more effective than the current sanctions? That's my first question.
이게 잘 작동하는 거죠?
So everything is
마이크 잘
working fine,
작동하는 거죠?
right? Can you hear my voice? Thank you, Minister. This is very considerate question.
세 가지 정도를 요약해서
So I can summarize in 3 ways. First,
다양한 이상
so audacious initiative, what's the implication? I ask myself, and this is my view. Well, this is truly an audacious initiative itself, and that is why this is very significant. What I mean by that is, as Minister Song, you mentioned that if we put 1, 2, 3 drugs, keep putting the same drugs and expect to enjoy the effect, it wouldn't work. Then I believe that we need to add a new drug. It's action for actions. We need to focus on that. But if you look at the audacious initiative, denuclearizations, even though the North Korea shows the willingness and determinations, then South Korea will provide aid. Aid is food aid, infrastructure, and finance, everything. But this is not an action for action, but just as long as North Korea shows its willingness and determinations to halt nuclear weapon programs, then South Korea is willing to provide a mega scale food aid or infrastructure support. So that's significant. What's the hidden intention? This kind of audacious initiative proposal implies that we are willing to talk and we have interest in the livelihood and also the situations in North Korea. That's the true meaning of the audacious initiative. Now, the second issue is quite serious. The second issue means, can we really implement that? That's a serious issue. However, I believe in this way.
오차 방정식이다.
This is a high-level equation. When we went to school, when we learned math, there's one x, one y. Then this is simple, right? X, y. But if there are a lot of variables, then the math problems become very complicated, difficult to find the solutions. But I guess the audacious initiative is same as very complicated and multiple level of the equations. So, Minister, you talk about the trilateral relations, but think about our allies, all the allies. We have our own perspective and also our own way of interpreting the denuclearizations, but our allies interpret denuclearizations in different ways. Minister, you briefly mentioned the United States. I serve as the US ambassador, but also EU ambassador, and European people, they have their own feature. What is EU, Europe? This is a consultative body. What I mean by that is when they are faced with an issue, all the members of the EU gather together. They spend hours and days and long period to come to consensus. But it's extremely difficult to reach an agreement or consensus because the 27 members of the EU have different perspective, different point of view. But when they reach a consensus or agreement, they come up with a concrete promises to implement that. It's very difficult to change that. I used to work in Brussels, and the major features that I observe is that it's very difficult to reach an agreement, but once it is reached, they always implement it. You know the name of that? It's always critical engagement policy. Critical engagement policy means that everything cannot be done overnight. After a long time of the consultations and come to conclusion, they implement it. There are three things. First, non-proliferation. Non-proliferation means that all the members of the EU, when they look at North Korea, non-proliferation is the biggest concern. Second, well, North Korea, you keep causing a lot of provocations, but stop threatening South Korea with a provocation. Third is human rights. As I mentioned before, EU is a consultative body, and once we reach an agreement, it's really hard to change that. So in order to implement audacious initiative, the government began to talk about it already. What do we need to do to implement the audacious initiative? We need to ease the UN sanctions, and US cannot ease UN sanction alone. UK, France, they need to agree. Only then the UN sanction can be eased. This cannot be done easily. The EU, I have experienced for a long time. Yes, they are keenly interested in North Korea. This is one variable. Second, Russia and China could be another variable. I used to work at the US Embassy and in Washington, and when North Korea conducted fourth nuclear test, 2272 UN resolution was adopted, and 2272 gave the toughest, most difficult conditions. They cannot export coal or they cannot import oil, and all the financial institutions were closed down. That's the UN resolution 2270. This is the toughest resolutions that put a greatest sanctions, and additional 5 UN resolutions were all passed after that. Within Washington, the major topic was that how China agreed to such a tough UN resolution. Well, if you look at closely, the greatest interest and interpretation was that we've been discussing for a long time, but you have to understand one thing. North Korea is not an asset but liability to the strategic interest of China, and China finally realized that North Korea is not an asset but a liability. But look at China right now. Look at Russia right now. Russia and China, can we get a help from them in relations with North Korea denuclearization? Well, Minister Song, you keep giving me signal that I should stop, but another variable is North Korea. Look at that. They are talking about power with the power or head-on contest. And also, they are willing and ready to continuously carry out their hard stance. And they are doing it to once again carry out their nuclear weapon programs. So the audacious initiative will be extremely difficult to implement that because it's such a complicated equation. If so, then the audacious initiative is great and efforts, yes, we need to make it, but it will take a long time to actually put that into actions. And Vice Minister Kim talked during the keynote speech that the Korean government will take a consistent approach. But within 5 years, I don't think it will be possible. But even though 5 years is not enough, then still the Korean government needs to carry out this audacious initiative for a long time because North Korea's missile threat and nuclear development program will continue. How can we do that? Well, once again, implementing the sanctions and pressures are the answers, and we shouldn't delay anything. And also the Vice Minister of Unification mentioned when he read the speech, the first word he said about was three pillars: engagement, second, continuous sanction, third, deterrence. So based on these three pillars, Korean government continue to work. Sorry for my lengthy comment.
좀 마음 같으세요.
Well, I would love to give you more time to press that on, but the host will not allow me to do that.
Joe DiTrani and his remarks in the later in your comment time. 그 다음에는 우리 신정.
Now, well, actually, to save time, I have listed up certain questions and shared them with the panelists in advance. So next in order is former ROK Ambassador to Republic of China, Jung-seung. And Xi Jinping is about to serve his third term, but he is now embroiled in Taiwan issue. But some people say that Xi Jinping will be determined to stop the war or prevent a war in Taiwan. But what means do you think China can mobilize to deter North Korea's nuclear and long-range missile tests? Despite the deterioration of the US-China relations, do you see any chance of compromise regarding the North Korean issue between the two countries? China and Russia, you might think they are too busy. But for China, because of its tensions with the US and Taiwan's trade issues, they cannot afford to have another confrontation regarding North Korea. So regarding these two issues, Ambassador, could you share your insights? First of all, I would like to thank for inviting me to this wonderful conference and thank the host for the invitation. As Minister Song has mentioned, China would not want another confrontation or conflict on the Korean Peninsula because it is preoccupied in other bigger issues, and I fully agree with them. President Xi is seeking third term of office, but even before that, China has always argued for peace and dialogue when it comes to the Korean Peninsula. To achieve their dream of Great China, they need to grow their economy for a long time. And they need political stability in the region for economic growth. Whenever there was high tensions on the Korean Peninsula, China has emphasized stability and peace And in 2013, after the third nuclear test, that's when China and North Korean relations began to sour. And at that time, whenever China had a chance, has emphasized that there should be no nuclear weapon on the Korean Peninsula, no confrontation on the Korean Peninsula. And in other occasions, China does not want a war at its doorstep. But in order to maintain its power on the Korean Peninsula, I think that is the source of its major influence for China. If Korean Peninsula changes in a way that's favorable to giving more power to China, China might support such turmoil on the Korean Peninsula. And North Korea's nuclear test and long-range missiles, what kind of measures can China mobilize to deter North Korea from doing that? Well, when you look at US-China relations and the rising tensions and competition, well, I think it might just be a verbal threat. China might send that it is very deeply worried about rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula, or China could decide not to veto the UN sanctions on North Korea to try to bring North Korea down. When US-China relations were bad in the past, before North Korea made a provocative move, North Korea used to ignore China and did not communicate its plan to China in advance. And China was kind of furious with North Korea not coming under its control. And North Korea even said that China has almost no influence over North Korea. However, when the tensions on the Korean Peninsula rise due to North Korea's provocation, China tried to engage actively. In 2015, there was a DMZ incident that has escalated the tensions, and China has made a very strong sanctions or threats to North Korea and made North Korea apologize. And I believe I heard Chinese officials saying that they did this. When there was deterioration of US-China relations, China was against severe economic sanctions on North Korea, but it has always argued for resolution of nuclear issues through dialogue. Because I believe China believes in the strategic value of North Korea. With the advent of Trump administration, China became very sensitive to any political change on the Korean Peninsula. And it was very sensitive about the possibility of North Korea getting close with the US and getting away from China. Kim Jong-un, under such circumstances, visited China 4 times, and Xi Jinping visited Pyongyang in 2019. That has normalized the bilateral relations. And China might be tilting towards North Korea's side in nuclear issues. The next question was, despite the deterioration of US-China relations, what kind of compromise or coordination can these two countries make for North Korean issues? The US administration, when it comes to climate change, international infectious disease pandemic, the US has continuously said that it wants to cooperate with China. And China said that this is a matter of bilateral relations, and China has said that it has different set of strategic interests on the Korean Peninsula from that of the US. And North Korea says that this is a bilateral issue between North Korea and the United States. Because of time, I would like to conclude my remarks now. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. 신 대사님.
Thank you, Ambassador Shin. Among your comment, China and US, it's very difficult to prevent, but you know that small fires need to be prevented so that it wouldn't become a massive scale fire. However, such mechanisms to prevent that probably has weakened. So when there is a certain confrontation or a big conflict happens in the Korean Peninsula, the mechanism to prevent that small fire becoming a big fire has weakened. Well, originally, President Zhu Peng was supposed to join us, but he couldn't. So rather, we have with us Director Jung Young of the Korean Studies in Fudan University. And Director Jung Young, would you like to add comment? So I guess it will facilitate our discussion. So I'll give you 5 minutes. And I'm giving 5 minutes to each speakers so that we can continue to have further discussions. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And especially today's very meaningful day, and thank you for inviting me. Well, it's the same question imposed to me, so let me briefly mention. Regarding the first question, US and China, the relations are so tensed, and especially China could exercise a great influence on the Korean Peninsula, but unless the Sino-US relations become stabilized, probably it wouldn't help at all to stabilize the relations or the situation on the Korean Peninsula. And with the COVID-19 and for overhaul, there's another meeting scheduled to be held in October. And I believe that only when the meeting is held in October, then we can understand. I'm talking about the 20th Party Congress in the fall. When it is held, then we can understand what's the future directions of the China. And I hope that you would understand that the definite directions can be crystal clear sometime in the fall. Now, how can we stabilize the situations on the Korean Peninsula? Well, I believe that depending on the Korean Peninsula's situation, China might take different actions. First of all, China is not taking any action at all, and if something happens, something minor thing, then China will just ignore that, will not take any actions because China has other issues to take care of. So the first, I believe that China's action would be just let it happen, just ignoring whatever is happening on the Korean Peninsula. But if Korean Peninsula suffers a sort of war-like situations or a huge confrontation, then China will ask North Korea to not to escalate the situation or to put a brake on their action. At the same time, and I believe that China might ask Republic of Korea to prevent from taking any provocative actions. And as you know that any kind of sparkles or any problems or any minor issues happening on the Korean Peninsula can threaten the stability in the Northeast Asia. So China might ask South Korea to put a brake on any actions that we might take. So I believe that the compromise or coordinations might happen. Another point that I'd like to mention is that when the situation was quite good, especially when the China and North Korea relations was quite good, especially when the US and China relations was good, then we could have hoped that China take a certain actions to influence North Korea, but not anymore. With the deteriorations of the US-China relations, we cannot expect China to take any actions against North Korea. And China is in a position not to make its own insistence, and once again for the cooperation, it will be very hard to expect any kind of motivations to occur so that the China can exercise influence. And once again, US and China, both of them would like to use North Korea as their negotiating bargaining chip to be in an upper hand. But once again, I also see that the compromise or coordination regarding the North Korean issue is likely to happen again. And what about North Korea? Will North Korea use the current situation as a bargaining chip? It's also likely. And US and China direct coordination will decrease in the future, but rather Korea-US coordination or China-North Korean collaborations or coordination will be greater. On the contrary, North Korea and US or inter-Korean cooperation are likely to be decreased. Thank you.
중 박사님,
Thank you very much, Director Chung, and also being punctual. And I have a follow-up question because you have been very punctual. And I'm not sure this is an appropriate question, but let me be direct with you. If China
핵을 가진 북한,
has to deal with, it has to choose one out of the two, either nuclear North Korea or North Korean collapse. If China was to choose one between the two, there are no other alternatives. So what do you think China would choose? Thank you for the question, Minister. To be honest with you, North Korea that has nuclear weapon can be denuclearized. But if it is collapsed, there would be no way of bringing North Korea back. So I think China would go for nuclear North Korea rather than the collapsed North Korea. Thank you for the question answer. Next. We would like to ask former ambassador to Japan, Ambassador Lee Soo-hoon. I have several questions.
2 days ago, at the Liberation Day commemoration, President Yoon said about his plan to improve ties with Japan, and that was quite bold as well. Especially, he mentioned that based on the 1998 declarations adopted by then President Kim Dae-jung and then Japan's Prime Minister Obuchi, he also would like to improve the relations with Japan in a more future-oriented way. Now, looking at Kim Obuchi declaration, it's comprised of the two pillars. When Kim Obuchi declaration was adopted, at the time I was working at the Blue House as a foreign policy secretary. And the main two pillars are, first, Japan will apologize and also admit its wrongdoings committed during the war. That's the first pillar. And second, based on that apology and admit its wrongdoing, two countries will move toward a common future. But both countries have moved away from these two pillars, and President Yoon is referring and his desire to go back to the time and the contents of the Kim Obuchi declarations. And of course, President Yoon would like to go back to these declarations, but is Japan ready to go back to and implement the declarations? That's my first question. And second, Korea-Japan relations are important. It's been mentioned many times, but more recently, of course, we have some complementary relations, but once again, it's as if U.S. and Japan, as long as they work well, Korea and Japan relations is not that important. Japan act as if it doesn't care to have any kind of relations with South Korea. As long as Japan has a close relationship with the U.S., then it can manage anything. That's the attitude of Japan. So please make a comment. Well, first, I'd like to congratulate the 50th anniversary of Institute for Far Eastern Studies of Kyungnam University, and thank you so much for inviting me here today as a panelist. Well, Minister Song, you have asked me two questions. Those two questions are very tough questions to answer. How are we going to improve ties with Japan? That's a very tricky. You know that the relations with Japan is at its worst stage, and it's not something that happened overnight. I believe that the deteriorations and the worsening relations started the moment when, ever since Prime Minister Abe became the president, and also at the end of former President Lee Myung-bak's uh, administration, the relations become worse and worse. What's the reason? What's the background? The reason is about the past history or the Japan's wrongdoings during the war. And as Minister Song mentioned, President Yoon is willing to improve ties with Japan based on the Kim Obuchi declarations and would like to move toward a common future. And a second level of Kim Obuchi declarations need to be remapped. We totally agree with that suggestions, but I mean, no one will oppose to that idea. But as Minister Song, you mentioned, in 1998, when the declarations was adopted by then President and then Prime Minister, the atmosphere at the time was really, really amicable. And comparing that time with right now, the atmosphere has changed totally differently. At the time, I'm sure you all remember, in 1998, thanks to the post-Cold War era, many leaders in Japan admitted its wrongdoings during the war, and as they admitted that they have actually used Korean women as sex workers during the Korean War, and they admitted it, they apologized that, and they even mentioned that they would be responsible for its wrongdoings. So as you're well aware of, there was a Kono speech and Murayama speech, and also they have acknowledged its wrongdoings, and based on all of that, finally, then Japanese Prime Minister Obuchi agreed to meet with President Kim Dae-jung to reach Kim Obuchi declaration. So it's an agreement reached by two sides to acknowledge the past wrongdoings and then move toward the future. So the overall trend was really amicable, really good. And in Tokyo, Japan, the post-Cold War atmosphere was also boosted in Japan. There were politicians who wanted to also admit its wrongdoings. That's why the conditions, the atmosphere was so great that we were able to reach the Kim Obuchi declarations. In Korea as well, the similar situations occurred. Then President Kim Dae-jung emphasized the sunshine policy, engagement policy toward North Korea as well as to Japan, because the engagement policy applies not only to North Korea but also to Japan. With such trend, Kim Obuchi declarations was adopted. But as you're well aware of, as you know, current situation is very, very different than what it used to be in 1998. The official position of Japan is that they totally deny what happened in the past. They do not acknowledge nor admit whatever happened during the war, and they even say that the Korean in slavery of women during the Korean War as a sex worker itself, they already agreed during the previous administration, but forced conscriptions happened, but they are saying that it was also resolved. And Japan, in its official position, is that all of these issues were resolved. But why is Korea keep talking about this over and over? Japan is even criticizing Japan that Korea is not complying with its agreement. It's always breaching the promises made with Japan, and Japan even criticized Korea is somebody that it can never trust and cannot work together in the international stage. That's the official position of Japan. So my comment to President Yoon is you should not pay too much attention to the Japanese government, because Japanese government is very inflexible. They are stubborn, they have its own position, they'd like to push it to the end. But in order to improve relations with Japan, in order to create a second version of the Kim Obuchi Declaration, first, we need to persuade Korean victims, those who are conscribed as the forced workers or sex workers or the civic organizations or NGOs. We need to persuade them. If you go to and meet the opposition parties members, their atmosphere are very, very different. So you need to persuade the Democratic Party members. So President, you need to focus more on the domestic situation. What I mean by domestic situation is persuade domestic people, the victims, and other people, especially the conscribed forced workers. They would like the decisions made by the Supreme Court to be implemented, and we need to persuade them as well. So what's important to improve the relations between Korea and Japan is not to persuade Japanese government, but rather the President Yoon needs to focus more on the Korean people, because Japan, their official position is that all the matters were already resolved during the previous governments, and in order to talk to Japanese government, President Yoon and its current administration need to be well prepared domestically. But it seems like President Yoon is very stubborn and is eager to improve the ties with Japan. But if such pressure is too high, then that's like Korea is too anxious to produce result. If so, then we might make mistake. So Republic of Korea might fall into the pitfall of making mistakes. So once again, my suggestion to President Yoon is, even if it takes time, please, and even if it's extremely painful, President Yoon and its government needs to make sure to consolidate the foundation and go step by step. First, persuade Korean victims, Korean people, civil organizations, and then go to the next stage. And probably we can say that, I mean, all the agreement reached with Japan were overturned because that agreement was not on a consensus among all the victims and the government. So we need to first persuade Korean people and then finally find the solutions. Well, your questions about inter-Korean relations, I will mention it later on.
이수은 대선
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lee. Korea-Japan relations are something that cannot be worked out by reason or logic. It's very emotionally entangled. If it's done by logic, it's easy. You're to resolve, but emotional issues are much trickier to resolve. Whenever we have a new administration, the politicians try to politicize Korea-Japan relations, and it has hurt us greatly, and it has hurt the Japanese side greatly. Professor Okonogi, can you share your comments about this later? And Professor Park No-byuk, former ambassador to Russia. Of course, Russia and Ukraine. What's going on in there? What's happening with the oil, gas, and food and grain? So today, as we are talking about the peace on the Korean Peninsula, but I would like to ask Ambassador Park about what's going on with the war. It's going to be a long, prolonged war, or do you think there is a chance for negotiation? And one more thing, Russia under international sanctions, and Russian oil is sold to North Korea, China, and India at a low price. So Russia is actually doing a big favor to North Korea, and Russia needs human resources, and North Korean people are going to Russia to work there. Under such circumstances, Russia's external situation, Ukraine, and economic sanctions. And in spite of all this, what kind of stance do you think Russia has about the Korean Peninsula? Well, I would like to thank the organizer, President Park Jae-kyu, for organizing today's conference. Minister Song, thank you for moderating this session. Minister Song has asked a very poignant question. Russian and Ukraine war. Well, I believe many people have heard about what's going on through the media. So I would like to mention just a couple of points. It's definitely becoming a long war. So between the three parties, between the Ukraine, Russia, and the West, depending on how their interests are combined, this could continue till next year. Russia, one of the high officials from Russia said that without Ukraine, Russia is not an empire. So Russia will be determined to subjugate Ukraine by crook or by hook. But now we're in a different era, and the international community believes that we shouldn't try to subjugate another nation. And Ukraine, they are showing strong national solidarity. And the US, Russian threat to the West, like Russia trying to resolve this issue through the Yalta approach, which is not acceptable. And President Zelensky of Ukraine said that he would try to conclude the war by the end of this year. So, of course, there is a lot of consumptive war in the southern area.
우크라이나 전체를 어떻게 좀 차지해서 복속
And Russia's plan to subjugate the entire Ukraine, and Ukraine government's willingness to make a political decision or concession. But Ukraine would want some level of security assurance to sign a truce treaty. And I think they have a lot of implication on the Korean Peninsula situation. And because Ukraine cannot rely on limitless support from the West, I think the end could be just around the corner. And Russia, what kind of role can it play? Because they have a very imminent threat on their doorstep. Of course, we need to learn lessons from Russia, and the way we see our relationship with Russia is determined not just by Russian policies, but how we approach them. When I served as an ambassador in Russia, I realized that Russia is a country of enormous flexibility. When our national interest could synchronize, then we can be great partners. So we shouldn't corner Russia too much. Of course, we cannot corner Russia, but first thing we need to remember is that when it comes to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, or the Russian style peace and stability believes that it's in line with their national interest. President Yoon has announced a audacious initiative, but it does not but it does not include the security cooperation. So we can talk about economic sanctions with Russia and North Korean nuclear issues. We always have to go back to the fundamentals. Russia, Putin has ordered to mobilize tactical nuclear weapons, and the world was shocked. But Putin has talked about NPT principles, and their defense minister has said that they will not use tactical weapon, nuclear weapon, on Ukraine. So Russia needs to be reminded of its responsibilities when it comes to North Korea. And because there is a war going on, North Korea is supporting Russia, and it can also send human resources to Donbass. And Russia might welcome North Korea in that regard. But fundamentally, Russia, when it comes to Far East economic development, they tried to work with North Korea before, but they were not successful. So given this, well, the situation is dramatically different between Russia and South Korea. And we are building Trans-Russia Railway, and Russia appreciates South Korea's commitment and our northern policies. Russia wants to continue to work with South Korea. And as the other panelists have said, the China and Russian alliance, this could change the international order between Russia and China. There has been very high-level talks. They're talking about no limit affiliation or exchanges. And we have speakers from China and Russia, but I believe there could be a limit to how far they can go with their bilateral cooperation. In early September, Russia, in spite of the ongoing war, they are carrying out military drill in Vladivostok, and China is participating in the military drill. Of course, they are part of the regular military drill. So you could say that they're trying to challenge the international trade order, or trying to balance the international trade order. So Korea, for the Korean Peninsula, needs to stay away from this imbalance in power. So even our partners have different sets of values. We need to be open-minded and be willing to work with them. And the National Assembly should also work hard to establish a national consensus and build on our capability. Thank you very much.
지금 러시아의 기름이 좀 많이 올라오고 있습니다.
Is a lot of oil flowing into North Korea? Well, it's not officially known, but from the offshore, the oil is transacted under the table, but due to the UN sanction, we need to take a firm actions. And so does China. They are taking a similar position. Thank you. Maybe Professor Alexander Voronchov, you can make a comment about this. Toward what Professor Park talked about, if you can make additional comments. What is war? War is done by the people, right? By the Korean people, and US or other countries are taking part indirectly. US and Western countries, they are concerned over the fact that they need to endure extremely cold winter, and of course the oil price is skyrocketing, but in a democratic country, they are getting sick and tired. I mean, if you go to gas stations, if the oil price is really high, if buying bread and inflation is really high, then probably people will complain in the Western society. But within Russia, what's the general people's feeling? I was informed that Russian people actually support what Putin is doing, and Putin's popularity never dwindle or decrease. And next, we'd like to ask President Ko-Yoo-han of Korea Institute for National Unification. He is truly an expert in the national unification area and also in the inter-Korean relations. In the future, please, not only you need to do the research, but I'm sure that he will do a greater work in the future. As I mentioned in my introductory remark, the most desirable one is a positive peace. Implementing positive peace is really important. Not only we need to maintain the negative peace approach, but also we need to implement positive peace initiative. By President Biden administration, yes, he is emphasizing the importance of implementing negative peace. And amid such situation, when we think about unification, we have not put unification at the forefront. And is this reasonable approach, or shall we take another approach? So that is my question regarding the positive and negative piece, because unification itself, we need to put on the table, and then we need to convert the inter-Korean relations into like a normal country-to-country relations. And then we need to approach with a different concept, especially our policy toward North Korea changes, then our policy to other foreign countries will also change. So once again, we need to totally transform the big framework of our foreign policy. And President Ko, what is your take on that? Thank you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the 50th anniversary of IFES and 33rd anniversary of the University of North Korean Studies. And 72 years ago, our institute, Korea Institute for National Unification, came into being. At that time, I was working for the Inter-Korean Institute under the umbrella of Dongguk University. And then we came into being, and then we focused very much on the national unification. 3 decades and 5 decades, we've been working so hard to do research and to realize national unification. Well, you mentioned about unification. In relations with unification, I mean, we aspire more and more, but the more ambitions and aspiration we have, it seems like unification is drifting away, farther away. And also, if we come up with agreement after a few days, it seems like our agreement has just evaporated. It's almost impossible to implement that. I'm about to retire. Actually, in August, I will be retiring. And looking back at my past career, I wonder what I've been doing until now. And in light of that, we need to think about the fundamental issues. And probably we have not touched the fundamental issues in relations with the national unification. Constitutionally, Korea regards all the neighboring area as our country, and based on the democratic order, we aspire to achieve unification. So these two is actually inconsistent. However, in a nutshell, unification is something that it's related with our ardent desire in a divided country, and the administrations or the government that leads Republic of Korea, when it realizes national unification, then it's definitely a justification. So we do have a presidential system, and the main role of the president or the duty of the president is national unification realization, which is quite interesting. Maybe during then President Park Chung-hee, this has become included within our constitutions. And in the inauguration speech, then President Park also declared that one of his duty is to utilize national unification. So the foundation of this emperor-like president concept came into this provision. So constitution-wise, yes, it states that unification must be done by the president. But in a way, if we continue to implement that, then this can be regarded as something that goes against our constitution. We have numerous agreements, like the basic agreement with North Korea, and there are other agreements. So if you look at the overall situation, in one way, we try to regulate our relations with North Korea using constitutions or laws and regulations. But also, if you look at another area, within the Korean Peninsula, there are two sovereign states coexist, which doesn't make sense. So sometimes these two are inconsistent. The only way to overcome all of these is, once again, the president leading everything by his own will. And you know that there was an issue of one of the South Korean people trying to evacuate from Korea and then go to North Korea, but then it was killed by North Korean army officials and it has become a hot potato. Of course, considering the overall situation, yes, this South Korean person was a criminal, and this criminal, and also there was another issue, the North Korean defector, they were hideous criminals, and they were once again sent back to North Korea. And all of these actions, why did we do that? To improve the relations with North Korea? What does it really mean? And if you look at the current situations overall, there are a lot of things that we need to consider. There are legally related things. We need to rearrange our laws and regulations so that we can stop arguing about the justifications or the duties. So basically, I believe that when there are two sovereign states coexisting within the Korean Peninsula, this is a reality, something that we cannot disregard. And more recently, based on the numerous arguments or discussions, we keep making suggestions or initiative. But what about North Korea's point of view? Well, one thing clear is that Kim Il-sung focuses on the unification or unity, and also his son focuses on the Korean national to become one nation. And still, based on that, he wanted to pursue the inter-Korean cooperation. But now, the current leader, Kim Jong-un, what is he focusing on? He focuses on the patriotisms, and also he talks about strengthening its own power and using nuclear weapons for its own security. And the definition of war is very different in the current administration. It is saying that to protect themselves, and officially it is not going to use nuclear weapons against South Korea. But you know, now Kim Jong-un changed its position, is saying that it can even use nuclear weapons against South Korea to protect itself. So its past position has changed, and now the President Yoon is talking about inter-Korean relations. But because of the Kim Jong-un change of the position, all the inter-Korean cooperation project has been stopped. That's about my comment. Now, finally, my conclusion is that we are gathered here to discuss about establishing peace on the Korean Peninsula. So, Korean Peninsula, we spent 7 decades in a status of like a truth. So we only have this truce agreement, but we need to convert this into a peace treaty. And based on the peace treaty, we need to establish a perpetual peace. And no matter what kind of efforts we've made so far, the current situation has not been resolved, nor the tensions were released. The only remaining card is normalizations of the DPRK and U.S. Diplomatic ties. And President Yoon yesterday had a press conference celebrating his 100 days, and he said that the support will be given to normalize the relations between DPRK and the United States. And also the Vice Minister Kim of the Unification mentions about the audacious initiative taken by President Yoon, which is a comprehensive agreement that even talk about providing support to normalize the economic and livelihood of North Korea. So this is like a process that we need to take on. So first, normalize the ties, and second, we are putting aside or putting back the priorities of the nuclear weapons, there will be huge differences. And in light of that, once again, the President Yoon's government, what will be his priorities? And what about North Korea? Will they be able to accept that? So the realizations of the audacious initiative depends on the priorities of each country.
고요.
Thank you very much, President Ko Yo-han. As you have said in your initial remarks, we are going through this repetitive cycle for the past 30 years and another 30 years. And on the extension of what you have said, let's go to the US. Joe DiTrani, Envoy, and Dr. Carla Freeman. So I have questions for you, but let me be more specific with the questions. President Yoon Sung-yeol of Korea said that in order to normalize diplomatic ties between the US and DPRK, he will provide diplomatic support. Of course, diplomatic support means a lot of things, but it could include persuading the United States to talk to North Korea and normalize the bilateral relations and remove sanctions on North Korea. But this is something that we have talked about repetitively in the past. In 2022 August, if South Korea and the United States are to have a discussion, and what kind of actions do you think North Korea can make to start normalization of diplomatic ties with the United States? So, Joe, could you go first? Ambassador DiTrani, could you go first?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Minister Song. It's great seeing you again, and congratulations to the Institute for Far Eastern Studies on its 50th anniversary. Look, I think, it was made clear by President Yoon just on his Liberation Day speech, where President Yoon Suk-yeol made it clear that denuclearization of North Korea is essential for sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula, in Northeast Asia, and around the world. So the sine qua non for any process that will lend itself to normalization of relations with the United States is complete, verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And indeed, there's no nuclear weapons in South Korea. So we're talking about North Korea. So that's the basic core issue here. And Minister Song, you were instrumental in getting the joint statement of September 19, 2005, where North Korea did commit to complete, verifiable, if you will, abandonment of all their nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons programs in exchange for security assurances, lifting of sanctions, a path to normalization of relations, and then even energy assistance, discussion of energy assistance, coming back to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty as a non-nuclear weapon state. So we've been there. As was said previously by our colleagues, we've had 30 years of failed negotiations, but we had some elements of success, like with the six-party talks, the agreed framework, and even in the Singapore summit with former President Donald Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un. So yeah, I mean, North Korea has to come back, and there's got to be some sort of negotiations going on, some sort of a discussion going on. But let me just pivot to the audacious initiative presented by President Yoon Suk-yeol, because I think that's key into Korean relations. And it was mentioned a minute ago, reunification of the Korean Peninsula is so important. And that's a key piece to the equation, obviously. And then the six-party talks, there's no question. The 5 countries came together to work it. And most recently, the US working very closely with the Republic of Korea. But North Korea does need security assurances, as was mentioned a few minutes ago. They definitely need security assurances. And they do, as was mentioned at the Hanoi summit in February of 2019, they need the lifting of sanctions, or at least relief with the sanctions that were imposed subsequent to 2016. So there's a myriad of issues that are there. President Yoon Suk-yeol has presented an initial roadmap, which I think is encouraging. If we could complement that with the security assurances and the path to lifting sanctions, but the core issue is complete verifiable denuclearization. So I just don't see normalization. I can see a process towards normalization, as we did with the six-party talks in the joint statement of September 2005, but that will take time, and that will take a lot of work, because North Korea now, with significant nuclear weapons, 40 to 60 assessments, with the missile delivery systems that to include intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're talking about hypersonics. They're talking about cruise missiles, submarine launch ballistic missiles. The capabilities now in North Korea certainly were not there in 2005, and they keep expanding exponentially. And my final comment is, North Korea now has a closer relationship, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, with the People's Republic of China and with the Russian Federation. And we saw at the United Nations where both Russia and China did not support UN Security Council resolution attempts to further sanction North Korea for its numerous missile launches in violation of Security Council resolutions. So if sanctions are no longer in play, UN Security Council resolutions that will impose sanctions, there's an element there of consequences for North Korea coming off the table. And I think, and my final comment, I think the world realizes, and I think everyone agrees, complete verifiable denuclearization has to be the core issue, because North Korea with nuclear weapons, as President Yoon indicated, lends itself to instability in the region, and certainly on the peninsula and in the world. And my final point is also the proliferation issues, the ability of North Korea, as we saw in Syria and Al-Qabar, to possibly sell or to provide a nuclear weapon or fissile material to a bad actor is always there. So I think we just need to get back.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, go right ahead.
But let me go directly to the point. Once again, just to make a progress in President Yoon's initiative, I think the United States cooperation in some partial lifting of sanctions on North Korea is the key. I think now the two governments must be working on that. But to your view, what kind of action from North Korea can trigger some small part of sanction lifting from the US side?
Briefly stated, North Korea
what kind of action from North Korea can trigger, that can facilitate Washington's action on lifting sanction, even though it may be some part of it, not whole lifting?
Yes, halting missile tests and desisting from a seventh nuclear test. If they did those two things, I would think, and coming back to talks, I think those two initiatives, halting missile launches and not moving forward with the seventh nuclear test, I think would be encouraging if they came back to talks and said, we have halted these tests, and I think there would be a good incentive on the part of, in my personal view, this is a personal view,
right, so
that some would say partial sanctions relief would be very, very possible.
Well, Joe, you and I have been in that negotiation table, so your point of view is very much in favor of negotiation and make success.
Yes.
But according to your comment, for North Koreans, what they have to do is doing nothing for now, right? Not testing, halting the nuclear and missile tests like that. So let me turn to Carla Freeman on the same subject. What she has to view on that?
Thank you very much. Well, first, let me say that I'm really humbled to join such an esteemed group of experts and policy leaders on today's panel. And I want to thank the Institute and also express my gratitude to President Park in particular for not only including me today, but also to congratulate you and also the Institute on this important anniversary. It was a great honor for me to have served as editor-in-chief of Asian Perspective, and it remains an honor to serve on Asian Perspective's board. Obviously, given the level of policy leadership and academic knowledge on the panel, I really have very little to offer, and it's difficult to follow Ambassador Detrani's comments. But let me just make a few comments based on my recent work at the United States Institute of Peace, which is a bipartisan US congressionally funded think tank in Washington, DC. And for the past year, I've been working with colleagues there to try to, in this very difficult time, to contribute some creative ideas to help strengthen strategic stability and to try to deal with some of the international volatility, even though it's often more an exercise in hope than anything else. Well, clearly, as can be seen by the recent ballistic missile defense exercises involving Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo, despite some recent bumps in the road involving American members of Congress visiting South Korea, on Indo-Pacific security generally, and on the issue of North Korea, South Korea, and the United States, there's a lot more common ground in policy since President Yoon's election. And both United States and South Korea see bolstering the deterrence architecture of critical importance. And I think the United States seeks to ensure that the region remains secure amid changes that it views as counter not only to its own interests, but also to the interests of its allies and partners. And the United States has made clear it sees its alliance with the ROK as vital to regional security. And that South Korea, to quote US Secretary of Defense Austin, is a positive democratic ally that's a force for peace and for international order. So the two countries have sought to broaden their relationship beyond the military alliance in this context and widen and deepen their economic and technological coordination. And President Yoon, of course, attended the NATO summit in July, suggesting deeper strategic alignment with the United States. So following the lack of the hope through breakthrough through President Moon Jae-in's efforts to forge peace on the peninsula, the Yoon administration's use of the carrot in this audacious proposal with a deterrence focus seems aimed more at denuclearization, as was said, as a start toward unification rather than a focus on unification. For the United States, Seoul's focus on North Korea as a threat to security and Yoon's North Korea policy that prioritizes denuclearization is welcome. I think the United States has said that it is open to talks with North Korea anywhere, anytime, without preconditions. But it has, of course, not sought itself to initiate diplomacy. And as was said previously, the audacious initiative, by implication, signifies Seoul is willing to engage in diplomacy, and you can see that as an opening move toward engaging North Korea. But the question is, the real challenge is, how can you get to start diplomatic talks? At the United States Institute of Peace, we conducted a peace game a few months ago on enhancing prospects for diplomatic engagement toward some kind of peace process. And I was an observer in that, and it showed really clearly that it's really important to have coordination between Washington and Seoul on North Korea, to have effective diplomacy with North Korea. And the peace game suggested, moreover, that harmonizing US and South Korean strategies on North Korea could actually enable modest confidence building measures that could be designed so they wouldn't undermine each side's security. And those confidence building measures could help catalyze diplomacy. In my humble view, thinking about this and listening to today's comments, maybe this more modest approach would have a better chance of starting diplomacy toward the audacious initiative, which seems a hard starting point just given its very audacity, including the fact that the program involves things like exports of minerals that would require a lifting of sanctions.
Carla, thank you very much. Well, may I interrupt you? Just I like to make you one question. Just to facilitate the Yoon audacious program, we also need some audacity from Biden administration. But as I said in the beginning, Biden administration's foreign policy is now very much widely spread: Ukraine, Taiwan, Iran, and so on. So do you think Biden administration is now right up to take some audacity which Yoon program needs?
Well, I think your point is a very important one, particularly as Pyongyang continues its provocations, and it appears to be moving toward testing and deploying tactical weapons. And it just seems that it is time for U.S. a more audacious approach by the United States, in my view. But you're right. I mean, the focus of the administration has been on strengthening deterrence rather than on addressing the North Korean threat. And it seems to me that it is going to take a strong South Korean push to and a strong signal of that there could be some success in moving toward some kind of productive engagement with North Korea before the United States can prioritize this. And I was just going to make the point that one of the important lessons drawn from this peace game was that the U.S. and South Korea really have to focus on coordinating their policies toward on North Korea, and outside the context of U.S.-China strategic competition for things to be effective. And I'm not sure that is possible under the current situation, because you see already the even in President Yoon's recent interactions with on Nancy Pelosi visit, the difficulty that Seoul faces in managing its important relationship with the United States, and at the same time managing its relationship to China. So I think it's a very difficult position.
Well, thank you very much. Just if I can make just one simple comment on this Pelosi's visit. I think this is not the matter between Korea's position between United States and China. Simply, he was on leave. He was on summer vacation. If when Korean speaker of the National Assembly visits the United States, I don't think the American figures in leaders in vacation could share the time to come to see the visit. It's just, let's make it a very simple, connotation, not that much complexities. Okay, now 이제 다음에는 오코노기.
Next, Professor Okonogi. I have already asked him a question about Korea-Japan relations and the commitment of President Yoon to improve the relations, and what's the situation like in Japan?
네, 감사합니다. 오코노기 교수입니다.
Thank you. I'm Professor Okonoki of Keio University. First, I'd like to congratulate the 50th anniversary of IFES and also 33rd anniversary of the University of North Korean Studies. Once again, my deepest congratulations goes to both agencies. And also, thank you for hosting international conference commemorating the two agencies' anniversary. And I'm privileged and honored to be here as a panelist. Now, Ambassador Lee Soo-hoon, you briefly talked about the atmosphere in Japan. Yes, your assessment is very accurate. The relations between South Korea and Japan is, how should I say, is far from going to the normalized relations. Is not likely to go back to improved or normalized relations. However, President Yoon took initiative, which is quite bold. And I'm sure that if President Yoon's initiative or proposals to improve ties with Japan become widely known to the international stage, then Japan might respond. Now, you talked about the trilateral cooperations. Well, amid current situation, there are so many issues, especially Japan and Korea's historical issues. This is strengthening the trilateral cooperations, and frankly, even though we're talking about trilateral cooperation, still it seems like it's only two bilateral relations, so relations between ROK and US and Japan and US. So these two relations are going in a parallel manner within the framework of trilateral cooperation. Now, going to the historical issues or past wrongdoings between Korea and Japan, which are very critical, once again, it's very unfortunate that we are trapped in the past and are unable to improve the relations. Let me just introduce one thing about the ongoing situation in Japan. The current Prime Minister Kishida, at the end of last year, gave a speech at the Japanese Diet, and Japan's security policy are being remapped. They're restructuring their foreign policy. First, the national security strategy are undergoing a review, and they're talking about the self-defense army, and also they are even talking about how to protect its own country. So self-defense forces, and also they are talking about how to enhance its defense capacity. So I guess these areas will be remapped or restructured by the end of this year. A sort of conclusion will be reached by the end of this year. That's an ongoing thing. Here, most important thing is the defense expenditure will be increased by 2%. It's one of the important goals, spending the defense, increasing the defense expenditure. 2% of the GMP if it increases, but still if you compare the defense expenditure of China, it's less than half, which means that the collaboration between Korea and Japan are very important. And Korea, Japan, can they trust each other? This is another important thing. In order to protect these two countries by themselves and also for their own security, they need to trust. So confidence building is also important. However, the confidence between Japan and Korea have been totally collapsed, and we need to revive it, which is really tricky and difficult. President Yoon Song-yeol made a speech at the Liberation Day in his commemorative speech about improving ties with Japan, and based on the Obuchi Declaration, it is willing to improve the ties. That could be a fundamental cornerstone for the future relations. During the past 10 years between Japan and Korea, there were so much conflicts, conflict, and a lot of tough challenges stemming from the past history and wrongdoings. But once again, this past conflict is related with the issue of identity. And we need to refrain ourselves from insisting our own position. We need to build trust, confidence-based relations. Only then we can truly move toward a future. And only then we can have a bright future. That's my first comment. Thank you.
지금 말씀 감사합니다.
Thank you. Japan will increase defense expenditure to 2% of the GNP, and in EU, Germany has increased the defense expenditure to 2%. So similar thing will be happen in Japan. And even if it's increased, it's less than half of what China is spending, which means that in order to maintain stability and security within Northeast Asia, we need to also spend more defense budget. Now, it seems like Japan is not eager to improve ties with South Korea, or the issue of Korea is low in terms of the agenda order. And we have this sense or a feeling that Japan doesn't really care much about its improving relations with South Korea. So what do you think about that? And we'd like to know what are the views of the intellectuals in Japan, if you can add the overall feeling. Yes, it's very important questions that you have raised. We are also worried about that. That's most of what the intellectuals in both countries are worried about. And eventually, there's a possibility that can happen. Of course, we keep talking about strengthening the trilateral cooperations, but it seems like it's not a trilateral, but rather it's a bilateral relationship between US and Japan and US and Korea. It's regrettable. And we are losing time and we are missing the opportunities. Thank you. Next, we'll invite Professor Alexander Boronchov. We'd like to hear your views. Thank you so much for your patience. And I have given 5 minutes to other speakers, but you've been waiting so long, so extra interest will be given to you, so I'll be giving 7 minutes to you. And Professor Park No-byuk made a comment, and can you add your views regarding that issue?
First of all, I would like to emphasize that it's a great honor for me to join such high-ranked and distinguished experts, ministers, scholars community. And of course, I would like to sincerely congratulate my lovely Kyungnam 극동문제연구소 great anniversary. The question which we discussed now with my colleague, Professor Park No-byuk, our ambassador, who was recently ambassador in Moscow, and we had a pleasure to meet many times. Of course, very important. And of course, from one side, Russia, traditionally, it's a constant interest of Russia to preserve peace and stability on Korean Peninsula, because it's our border, part of our border stability. Especially now, when Russia is engaged, unfortunately, in very heavy and many resources, very consuming military conflict on Ukraine. Russia, of course, has no any reason to support some aggravation of situation on Korean Peninsula and some new conflict on the border of Russia in another region, it's absolutely contradicts Russian national interest, I mean Korean Peninsula. At the same time, we could see and accept the reality that a bilateral relation between Russia and Republic of Korea, between Russia and North Korea, in framework and in result of this military conflict in Ukraine changed, and in different direction. And we cannot ignore that North Korea in this situation support Russia very strongly, very consistently, and very actively. We remember, yes, that only 5 countries voted against in the UN General Assembly in the beginning of March, which condemned Russian military action in Ukraine. Only 5 countries voted against this resolution. It was Russia, it was Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and Eritrea. I don't know why Eritrea. And North Korea is actively support Russia position. And as you know, of course, very well, they recently, last month, in the beginning of this month, they established relation with Donetsk People Republic and another People Republic, yes, 2 People Republics, and officials of Donetsk government and the Second Republic's government became the frequent guest in the embassy of North Korea in Moscow. Of course, and North Korea demonstrate readiness to support Russia, yes, and to send labor forces, which Russia keenly need in devastating areas of the liberated areas of Donetsk and Lugansk. It's the second, yes, Lugansk People Republic. And the officials of Lugansk and Donetsk government told that some agreement was achieved between these republics. They are independent formally, yes, they are not part of Russia. And some agreement of inviting of labor force of North Korea to these 2 republics is achieved. It's more or less reliable information. In Russian mass media, there are some, for me, provocative news and some guesses, some inviting of military journalists that even North Korean military forces can be invited and they are ready to join Donetsk, Lugansk People Republics troops to participate in the military conflict. As we know, Russian government strongly refuted and rejected these rumors and told strongly that from point of Russia, that forces that are now engaged, Russian troops and these 2 republics troops, which are engaged in the military conflicts, it's quite enough for the resolving of the tasks which Russian government defined.
Okay, Mr. Professor Bronsov?
Yes.
So you are now going to talk about some expansion of Ukraine war to an international war, even inviting North Korean forces there. Is that what you just implied?
No. I told that there are rumors on the level of the mass media, but official Russian government strongly against inviting of North Korean troops, strongly against.
Okay.
And there was special statement of foreign ministry and Russian government.
I hope rumor just remain as a rumor, but there is a saying that the first casualty of war is normally the truth. So we cannot find the truth at this moment, the war going on in Ukraine. But my last question is, how long do you think Russian public will continue to support Putin's campaign in Ukraine? Endless? 6 months, 1 year, or endless?
My short answer will be endless.
Okay, I got it. Thank you very much. 지금은 이제 아까 원래
We are supposed to conclude this at 11:30, but we are running out of time now. And among the panelists, I think we have agreed to spend 10 more minutes. So if there is a burning comment that you would like to share with us, I can give you 1 minute, just the gist. So please raise your hand if you have a burning point to make.
So first of all, Professor Lee Soo-hoon. During the first round, you have asked me a question I wasn't able to answer. And also the trilateral cooperation and Korea, Japan, and also the relations, the bilateral relations, Korea, US, and Japan, US. These two relations are going in parallel manner. Regarding this agenda, let me make a comment. During the former Prime Minister Abe's regime or the administration that lasted about 10 years, he actually implemented quite controversial or a confronting policy. Prime Minister Abe emphasizes the importance of the trilateral cooperation. Whenever he opens his mouth, he always talks about the importance of the trilateral relations. However, in order to do that, the relations between the three countries need to be strengthened. However, Prime Minister Abe has another idea. He's pursuing something else that disturb actually the trilateral cooperation, that actually worsens the relationship between Korea and Japan. Unfortunately, South Korea could not read between the lines, and especially former Prime Minister Abe usually implemented a foreign policies that exercises mostly its influence or its relations with a large superpower. Mostly it is its foremost priority is with relations with a big country like US. You know that former Prime Minister Abe had a very close relationship with the US and also Putin, and then to EU, Australia, India. So only and France and Germany. So Abe was only interested in improving the relationship, was eager to strengthen the ties with the superpowers or a big country, while ignoring or putting behind the relationship with small countries. Especially, it disregarded the relationship with South Korea, put the importance, was really lacking. If you look at the defense paper or other government papers that was published by the Japanese government, you can see that the priority of Japan's relations with Korea lags far behind than any other countries, which means that although Abe seems like he's emphasizing the trilateral cooperation is important agenda, actually he wasn't doing that. And at the same time, the past history issues or the wrongdoings once again worsen and worsen. And at one side, Abe was trying to include the Korea's Japan's relationship within the framework of trilateral relations, but actually it was not doing that. The consequences of that is the deteriorating relations with Japan.
Well, I think we can give 1 hour to each panelist. I know it's quite difficult to squeeze your points in 1 minute. So, Director Shin, just 1 minute. Would you like to go first? So, Ambassador Shin first, just 1 minute. Sorry. This strategic conflict between the US and China and North Korea's nuclear threat that is being materialized. we have to go for negative peace, and I agree that this is the way to go. But maintaining negative peace is not easy, especially deciding how to respond to North Korea's nuclear threat is challenging. North Korea will not give up its nuclear weapon or take decades to dismantle its nuclear weapon, and China seems to believe that way too. So that is why China is emphasizing peace building more than denuclearization these days. As Ambassador An Ho-young has mentioned, we could build up more sophisticated conventional weapons and also strengthen our alliance with the US, but China might not like that, especially if North Korea makes some kind of provocation in response to some kind of alliance between South Korea and the US. The situation could be more unstable. So China must also understand the inevitability of the situation. So between the DPRK or the US or between four-party talks, the dialogue must continue, and China must believe that, at least for nuclear issue, it's an interested party. And China should not use the North Korean nuclear issue as a card in dealing with the United States. And Professor Chin?
지금 한반도 상황은 너무 민감하고 불안한 상황.
Current situation is quite risky and also dangerous. We should not be self-compliant. And what I'd like to ask of you is that when foreign forces come into, it's quite dangerous. And I believe what is happening on the Korean Peninsula is quite similar during what happened in Cheong Dynasty. And also, if you look at North Korea, it kept developing the missiles and nuclear weapons. The things are becoming more irreversible than ever before. So, in a nutshell, Korean Peninsula, what is happening here can only be resolved by the active participation between North and South Korea. Of course, the audacious initiative could be one, but also there could be other approaches, and South Korea needs to pay extra attention for that. Thank you. Well, talking about THAAD, let me make a comment. THAAD deployment, and also it's not because the change of the government changes the position of China, but North Korea keep developing its nuclear weapons and missiles development, and South Korea needs to protect itself. And that is why we are talking about additional deployment of THAAD. It's not because the Yoon's government is different than the former Moon's government. It's not that. I hope you'd understand that. Well, the most urgent task right now is what's going on between the U.S. Korea's military exercise and the 7th upcoming North Korea's nuclear weapon test. And in order for the audacious initiative to be implemented, somebody mentions about any kind of small gesture or actions to be carried out by North Korea, and that could be first stopping the development of the missiles launch and also the 7th nuclear weapon test. Yes, I totally agree. And North Korea is using the 7th nuclear weapon test as a bargaining chip. And also this bargaining chip can be used to encourage and induce DPRK to come to the negotiation table sometime within this year or before the end of this year. Who knows, North Korea might join the negotiation table. Maybe the 7th nuclear test could be another bargaining chip. And on that premises, South Korea and US need to take additional approach. Thank you. Yes, any additional comment? Would you like to do that?
지금 큰 그림에서
In the larger framework, China, the US, and China, Russia, this is the main framework. So because of these major tensions, the security issues in the Korean Peninsula could be neglected. So we need to be more vocal about this. And Cold War, we should avoid confrontation like Cold War at any cost. So we need to be more active about this. Thank you very much. Ambassador Shi has said that maintaining negative peace is not easy. In order to maintain negative peace, we need a lot of mechanisms, just like the positive peace. And University of North Korean Studies, I'm sure they will be organizing the next seminar on this issue. So we've had this international conference, and for the next 50 years and next 33 years, I hope IFES and UNKS can go beyond Asia. Of course, it is beyond Asia even now, but I hope it can be seen as the world's leading think tank education institutions in the world. Those of you who are joining us from overseas, 4 speakers, Ambassador Joseph Trani and Dr. Carla Freeman, Professor Okonoki, Professor Vorontoko Sov. Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your valuable insight with us. Thank you very much for your patience. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
장관님을 비롯한 연사분들께 감사의
Please, I would like to thank Minister Song and all the panelists and all the speakers and participants here. This concludes the first part of the international conference, and we'll make some arrangements and have the second part of this ceremony.